Hey, welcome to Randy Starts a Side Hustle episode number 13. And I'm winging this one on my own. I didn't have a guest this week, but I didn't want to go a week without making an episode. Thought about it a lot and I said, let me make an episode about me and my journey from way back, from when I was a little kid, from when I was born, from when I started all the way up to where I am now in life, and just touch on things that I've gone through, my family and my experiences, mostly my entrepreneurial journey that I want to share with you guys, and what I've learned and the challenges and stuff like that. So I wanted to share that with you guys. I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's go. Let's do this. Episode number 13. I can't believe I've done 13 episodes. This is exciting. I love it. I'm learning a lot doing this. I'm learning a lot from my guests, and I'm getting a lot of good experience doing my podcast. I hope you guys are enjoying my podcast. Give me feedback. And like I always say, if you guys want, give me recommendations, anything you guys want me to talk about, any type of guest you guys want me to bring on the show, let me know and I'll work on that. I'm gonna start. Let's go. Talk about me this week, and tell you guys what I've done. I'm gonna start with my parents. My parents are Cuban. They came from Cuba in the 60s. My father was a military man. My father was what they say in Spanish, un guajiro. He, in Cuba, started off as a young man working in the tobacco farms in Cuba. He actually grew and did the tobacco thing in Cuba before he went into the military. Then he went into the military, and in the military, his education, he got his education in Cuba, and he got some of his education in Spain. My dad was an educated man. He was Wahito, but my dad had a penmanship. That was one of the things that I always loved about my father. He could write like no one that I've ever seen. They used to teach them because I've seen, and you got to forgive me because I get emotional when I talk about my parents. Um, my father had a penmanship that I see people now. The way we write now is nothing compared to the way they taught these people back in the day how to write, how their penmanship. My dad would stroke that pen and he would write, and I would be like, wow, how do you write like that? They actually went through classes. They had classes that would teach them how to write so super like beautiful. I loved his penmanship. It was one of the things about my dad that I'll never forget, was the way that he would write and the way that he would sign his name. And you very rarely get to see that. Every once in a while I run into a Cuban that still writes like that, and I see it and I'm like, wow, that I can tell that back in the day they used to teach them how to write like that. My dad, in the military, was uh, a high-ranking official in the military. He was in Batista's army over there. He was actually ended up being a political prisoner. He fought against Castro in the jungle over there, and they had my dad in jail. And I don't want to get into the intricacies of it, but they tortured my dad. They did a bunch of horrible things to my dad, and eventually he was able to get out. And he went out through Spain. And on the plane ride, on the way out of Cuba, he met my mom on the plane. What a cool story they have. And I don't want to get too much into it, but it's a pretty cool story. They met on the plane. They went to Spain. They were in Spain for a minute, I guess, a while. And then my dad came to the States, and he came to New Jersey is where he went. And I guess that's where a lot of the immigrants that were coming from Cuba back in the 60s would go end up. A lot of them are still there in Jersey. People hear me talk and they think I'm from New Jersey. Yeah, I was born there, but I didn't live there. My parents left there when I was real young. He brought my mom over. He said, listen, I found a place for us to live. This is exactly what my mom tells me the story. He came here to the States. He went to New Jersey. He got set up here, and he called my mom on the phone. He said, listen, I got the play. I got our spot. I'm bringing you down. We're getting married. Boom, 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 boom. That's how it happened. That's how my mother and my father hooked up, came over here. Beautiful story. They had me in New Jersey. That's where I was born. Paterson, New Jersey. Never went there, never been to Paterson. I hear things about Paterson, different things. I know that they made a movie about that little city there and a school there in that town. But I've really never been to. I can't tell you a thing about Jersey, but people still that I meet now hear me talk, and I know it's the Latin accent that I have, and they say, "Oh, you're from New Jersey." They think that I'm from New Jersey, but it's just because I'm Spanish. But after a couple of years, when I was about 2 years old, my parents moved to Miami, Florida. And that's where my journey starts, here in Miami, where I am now. I grew up in a city called Carroll City. Okay, it was the hood where I grew up. I grew up in the hood. It was predominantly black. There was a like 10 or 20% Latin and 10 or 20% American gringos. That's what they used to call them. And that's where I grew up. I had an amazing childhood. I could sit here and talk to you guys about my childhood that was like no other. I wish that the kids nowadays could live and grow up the way that I grew up with my friends. I still have my friends from back in the day. I get emotional about it. They're my best friends, man. Like Richard, still friends today. We talked yesterday. He called me on my birthday. We had an awesome childhood. We would ride our bikes. We would get home from school and we could get on our bikes and we could go anywhere we wanted. Nobody told us where to go, what we could do. We just had to be, I had to be home by dark. And I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But the rule was for me that I needed to be home before the sun went down. But when we were out, guys, we did all kinds of awesome stuff. We played marbles in the sand outside. We played baseball cards. Like some of us had collections of thousands and thousands of base. I had drawers full of baseball cards. I wish I still had them today because we used to play baseball cards and use them like if they were money, and we would bet them and we would collect them, and everybody did it. So some people had thousands. I remember Richard's big brothers. They had closets full, stacked up from the bottom to the top of baseball cards. That was like such a fun time. And I remember go back to the 6 o'clock, be home before you're dark. Um, when I was a kid. And when I'm telling you kid, I was like 10, 12, 13 years old. We were little kids. We were riding around our bikes like if there were cars. We could go anywhere we wanted. And one day, and this happened a lot. This didn't just happen once, but just to give you guys an idea of some of the things that I went through with my old man. And the law was I had to be home when it was dark. And sometimes that would get away from me. Obviously, we would be having so much fun. I wouldn't be paying attention, and it would be getting dark. And it would be dark. And I remember my dad would come to look for me. And he would come. Usually, he would have my little sister that he would carry her around his neck because she was tiny. And he would be walking with her, and around his neck, he would have the belt, okay? And he would look for me, and Richard and Marcel and Tito, and all my good friends from back then can attest to this. And they'll laugh, and these are stories that are ingrained in our brains. And I remember that we would be playing baseball cards in the street, and like Richard would be sitting in front of me, and my dad would be coming behind me, and it happened once in a blue moon, every couple of months, it would happen where I would lose track of time and he would come looking for me. And every once in a while he would get me, and I get a couple of lashes on my legs. That I get these nice lashes on my legs that I would get to school the next day, and the teacher would ask, "What is that on your leg? Did you get hit?" And I would make up a story. No, I fell down. I would never throw my dad under the bus because I knew I deserved it. And I remember one day, Richard, we're playing baseball cards, and Richard tells me, "Yo, your dad's coming behind you," because they would tease me about it every once in a while, and it wasn't true. But this time it was true. He was coming. He was like, "Bro, your dad's coming behind you. You better go." And and I didn't believe him until he was like right like 50 feet away from me. I look back, I see the old man, and I would jump up and I would grab my stuff and I would jump on my bike. And the deal was always that if I made it home before he got home, like I made it home and got into the shower and got ready for dinner, that he wouldn't do anything to me. He wouldn't hit me. He wouldn't beat me when I was home already. He was cool. My dad was an awesome guy, man. He was a workaholic. He started off when I learned so much from the old man because my old man was an entrepreneur. He came to this country with the shirt on his back, and in Jersey, he started working for a big manufacturer of windows treatments. They were huge. They were big time all around the country. They manufactured window treatments. Levelor, you guys can look it up. They're probably still in business. And he worked for one of the big manufacturers, or one of their big factories over there in Jersey. And then when he came to Florida, to Miami, they looked him up, and they said that they had a little factory here that wasn't doing that well, that they wanted him to take over the factory, and he took over the factory. And within months, he turned the factory from a regular, 9 to 5 shift factory to a 3 shift 24-hour operation. They were building blinds 24 hours a day. I remember going there when I was young, when I was a little kid, and I remember rolling around the factory. Sometimes when I would go with him, my mom would take me over there to pick him up or whatever, and I would be there, and I would be rolling around the factory in the little carts that they had where they would stack the blinds, and I would get in those wooden carts and I would roll around and have a blast and do my thing. I remember those days. That was such a long time ago. The old man eventually started to sell window treatments. He would sell blinds. He started doing retail because that place was a manufacturer. It was a wholesaler. It would sell to companies like Home Depot didn't exist back then, but it would sell to big giant hardware stores and or little businesses, little companies that would come and buy blinds and go install them, or interior decorators and stuff like that. And my dad eventually got into that interior decorating business, into the field of window treatments, doing blinds. And he would go on the weekends and he would measure the windows of people's homes and he would give estimates. And then the following week, the blinds would be made, and he had a station wagon. Remember the station wagons back in those days, guys? He would fill the back of the station wagons with blinds, with vertical blinds and mini blinds. That's all they made back then. Now they have all kinds of stuff. It's amazing. But he would fill the station wagons with blinds, and once in a while, he would take me with him, because back in those days on the vertical blinds, they used to have these little chains on the bottom of the blinds. And I know there's a bunch of you on here, older folks, that will remember the little chains on the bottom of the verticals. And he would take me so that I would help him with the chains. And I would put the little chains on the bottom of the little verticals while he would do the hardware stuff, the drilling and installing of the rails and all that other kind of stuff. And once he was done with the window, then I would come to the window and I would put the little chains on the bottom of the blinds for him. Every once in a while, we were having, it's such a cool journey, man. Every once in a while, we'd go to a house where there was a little kid there. And then instead of working with him and helping him, I would play with that little kid the whole time. And I didn't do anything. He didn't care. My dad was awesome. And I remember one day that this little kid had a mini bike. And we were riding his mini bike in the backyard. And I loved it so much. The old man bought me a mini bike. I remember going out and riding mini bikes in the field at the school. Eventually, I got a YZ80, which is a bigger motorcycle. And I remember, I could go into stories about the motorcycle and the riding and all that fun stuff that we did with my friends. That was amazing, great childhood that I had. And I'll talk about that more. But I want to continue to talk about the old man in the window treatment industry. And my dad, did that for a while, and he started doing really well, man. It was a time in our lives in America where moms didn't work. Most moms were home with the family, with the kids. They were homemakers. They were taking care of the kids. They were taking care of the household. And don't get me wrong, moms, I know you worked really hard doing that. That was probably a harder job than actually going and getting a regular 40-hour-a-week job. Trust me, I know. Okay, they were homemakers. They were home raising us. My mom was home all the time, there to take us to wherever we needed to go, there to take us to baseball practice. Sometimes we walked to baseball practice because we could do it, because back then we were allowed to. Back then they didn't kidnap you, they didn't abduct you, there wasn't human trafficking, or at least we didn't know about it because there wasn't social media, so it wasn't a thing. Kids weren't disappearing until a certain time in our lives, and maybe I'll touch base on that later. But we had an amazing childhood. We were out, we were doing our thing. And Back, where was I? Um, so yeah, moms were homemakers. My dad worked all the time, did very well for himself and my family. I was like the rich kid in the neighborhood. I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound brag or anything about that, but you can ask my friends. My dad was one of the dads out of all of ours that did very well, and Chino's dad was also one of my dad's partners eventually that worked together in the industry and that did well. We all did well, but we had my dad made sure always that we had the best bicycles, and him and my mom always had brand new cars, Cadillacs. That's what they used to have, Cadillacs. They used to go out on weekends, and every Saturday was a thing for them to get dressed up and go out to dinner. And I remember my dad would always dress up in his suit, and my mom would get all dressed up all fancy, and we would go to these nice restaurants every Saturday. It was a thing. It was an awesome time in my life. I'll never forget it. My mother never had to work a job. She was there taking care of us and raising us, and it was amazing. I played baseball. Okay, and I'm going to get into things, and I'm going to talk about things that I learned what to do and what not to do from my childhood. A lot of things like baseball. I played baseball, Optimist baseball, for over 10 years, about 13 years. All of us played. Marcel played. Tito was really good. He played for a long time. Richard played. Richard was the pitcher on my team when we played together. I was the catcher. We had an amazing time playing baseball. And I remember this, guys. And I tell you now, I don't miss any of my daughter's events. I go to every one of her sporting events, any event that she has. I try not to miss anything. I think I've missed in the last few years, I think I've missed 2 basketball games. Okay. And that's it. My dad, in 13 years that I played baseball, I think he went to 2 of my baseball games. And I remember I would always ask him, and I missed it. I wished that he would come always to watch me play. I remember one of the times that he came, I hit a home run. It was exciting. He was there. It felt so good that he was there at the game with me. But he worked all the time. He was taking care of us. We were living the good life. We had a boat. We had cars. We did whatever we wanted. We traveled. We did awesome things in our life when I was younger with my family. We lived a good life because the old man was very successful. He literally came here to this country with the shirt on his back, and he lived the American dream. Live the American dream, guys. He built a business eventually with him and his cousins and and uh and Jesus, Chino's dad, where they eventually the company, the name of that company was, they had a few businesses in between this, but this one was the biggest one. And it was called American Blind Corporation. And I call them cousins, but they were nephews of my dad. But they were older, and then all their kids were cousins, and we call each other cousins, but they were my dad's nephews. But it was amazing. It was an amazing run. I remember we all worked together there. Let me get here to my notes, make sure that that I stay on point here. I remember playing sports in the streets with all my friends all the time. We would play baseball, football, like I said, all the stuff. It was just awesome. My father's business was huge. It was eventually became the number one manufacturer in the state of Florida of window treatments at one point. Super successful they were, and I was super proud of my dad growing up. I learned a lot from my dad, and I think that's where I got the whole entrepreneurial thing from my dad, that I've always been into business. And I remember one of the things when I was a child, talk about my mom. My mom, super, super godly woman. Always. She would always never miss church. Took me every Sunday. Every Sunday I would go to church. I'd have to go to church. It was a rule. I had to get dressed up. I had to get up, get ready, and go. Eventually I even became an altar boy at church. I went to a private school for a while, Catholic private school for a long time. But that was a thing. It was, always every Sunday going to church. It was instilled in me from when I was real little to pray and spend time with God. My mom, I'm so glad that she did that. in my walk with God, because I was always, even as a little kid growing up, I was always praying, and I would spend my separate little alone time with God and growing up, and I'm going to get into that later of my relationship with the Lord. But she always instilled that in me, and she would tell me, when you see me walking, because she would always go walking, always walked around and did exercise, and she would tell me, when you see me walking, just remember I'm always praying for you. And one of the things that she taught me as I was growing up, and it was, remember that you got to forgive people, because sometimes we would get angry and we would get upset, and she taught me, forgive people. That's the only thing that God doesn't forgive, is people that doesn't forgive others, people that don't forgive others. That's what God doesn't like. He wants you to be forgiving, just like he's forgiving, just like he came down here and died on the cross for your sins. Forgive others. Always taught me that as I was young, and on top of all the other stuff that she was always teaching me. Okay, and I'm going to move along here because I have a lot to talk about, and I don't want to make this super long podcast so you guys get exhausted listening to me, because I want to get into stuff about business and entrepreneurship. My little sister was born. And we lived over there in Carroll City for a while, but when she started getting bigger, my dad didn't want to stay in the hood. He wanted to leave the hood. He wanted to go to a nicer area, and we moved out of Carroll City, that I loved so much, that we had such an amazing childhood. Every time I drive through there, I get chills. And we moved to an area called Kendall, in the Kendall area in Florida. And there, I started I was bigger there now. I was 15, 16, went to high school there. And, eventually I did something really not cool. And I wouldn't recommend this to anybody, but when I was younger, I didn't like school, man. School wasn't for me. I'd be in school and I'd fall asleep in classes, and, I'd put my head down in the class and I would sleep because I didn't like it. I didn't want to be going to school. And around 10th grade, I think it was 10th, 9th or 10th. And this is the Wajito part of my dad. I was tired of it already. My dad, I think, must have been tired of all the different conferences and all the different calls with the principals and the assistant principals and all my BS in school. And I remember being at home, and I'll never forget this, man. I remember being at home with my dad talking. Yeah, I was bigger. Yeah, I was like 15 or 16, because I had failed a couple grades when I was younger in the private school. So I was behind a couple grades in school already. So I was a little older in high school. And I know now they have what they call middle school that goes up to 8th grade, and then high school. But back then it was junior high school was 2 grades. I think it was 7th and 8th, and then 9th grade. Yeah, it was. They called it high school. We went to high school, and I was in 9th or 10th, and I remember sitting in my I was already driving, so I was already 16 years or older, because I remember back then we drove to school. The kids were allowed to drive their cars to high school, and we would go to lunch in our cars. It was a different time. I remember sitting there with my dad and telling him that I wanted to drop out of school, that I wanted to go work with him at the factory. At this point, they had the big business already. It was cranking. It was doing real well. They had multiple factories at this point. They had one in Naples that was huge. They had one in Puerto Rico that was huge. They were super successful, and I wanted to go work with him. I was an entrepreneur mentality. I had already had jobs. I had already worked at Publix. I had already worked at Steamboat Playhouse. I remember working there just to make money, to be able to buy stuff and do my own thing, and working at Publix, being a bag boy and doing my thing there. And I wanted to go work with my dad. And I told him that I wanted to drop out of school. And he told my mother straight up, go tomorrow to the school, sign him out so he can drop out of school and he can start working with me on Monday. And that's what I did. And I don't recommend that to anybody. I missed out on so much fun with all my friends in high school. And later on, and years after that, I saw them graduating, and then going to college and doing all that. And I regretted it. I regretted that decision of leaving high school. I don't recommend that to anybody. You're going to have plenty of time to go in the workforce. It's a mission. It's a pain in the butt when you start off working. Don't rush it. okay? Finish high school, finish college, get an education, and then go into the workforce and do whatever you're passionate about. But enjoy those years of your life because they're awesome. And I missed out on all that. I regret dropping out of school. I went back at night. Because then I started to run into challenges where if I didn't have a diploma or if I didn't have a college degree, I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. I couldn't go to the military. I wanted to go to the military and I couldn't go because I didn't have a college degree. I mean, a high school diploma. So, I started going to night school and eventually I got my diploma. I got my GED and then I was going to go into the military and it didn't work out. I didn't go into the military. My uncles, my cousins, they didn't want me to go. At that point, I was well rooted at the factory. My father, I remember when he started me there. I remember that when I got there, I thought I was going to have some kind of bougie position because I was the owner's dad and my cousins didn't play that. He put me at the bottom of the totem pole at the factory. He put me on the line wrapping the blinds, not making them, not involved in any of that, not selling them, not nothing. Wrapping blinds. I would get a paper with had the number of the blinds, had all the information about the customer that purchased the blinds, the retailer, because we were wholesalers. So we would sell to the people that would sell the blinds to the public, and my job was to get the blinds, wrap them up, put an order number on there, put the name so they could track it, and put it in a box, and then the customers would come and pick it up. And I did that for a long time. Like, guys, I did that job for so many years with him at the factory to the point where I went through every aspect of the manufacturing of window treatments that I became an expert. But I remember one thing vividly, man. I didn't like it. I hated working there. After the years of being there, I hated it. I didn't like it at all. It was the worst. When it came to working jobs, I did not like doing the job. I didn't like having to wake up. My dad would tap me on the shoulder. I thought waking up to go to school at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning was bad. My dad would wake me up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning every single day. I remember back in those days, our parents, smoking wasn't like, back then in those days, they didn't look at smoking cigarettes as bad. So a lot of these adults, Mike, like my father, would smoke their cigarettes inside the house. Like, that's taboo now, anybody smoking anything inside of a home. Back then, my dad smoked in the house. He would come into the kitchen, and my room was right near the kitchen. Like, my door opened into the kitchen. And I remember that he would spark up the cigarette and start having his cup of coffee, and the cigarette smell would come under the door and would wake me up. And I remember that he would tap me on the shoulder, wake me up, let's go, boom, boom, boom. I would get to the factory, and then we would work there until he went home, because he went home early because he was the one that opened up the factory in the morning. So he would leave, and he would leave like at 3 o'clock, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and come home. And back in those days, remember, they brought habits back from Cuba, which was taking a siesta. Taking a siesta was one of my dad's things. He would get home after work, he would take a siesta for about an hour, and then he would start working outside on the lawn and on the house, and he would spend hours working around the home, on the outside of the home, and making sure that our home always looked beautiful. We had the most beautiful lawn in the block, and everybody was always talking about how beautiful our lawn was over there when we used to live over there near Sunset, where I went to school. And eventually, I got into the accounts receivable, accounts payable, doing, selling orders in the office, and helping my cousins with the company, working in the administrative. And I still didn't like it. I still, it felt good when you first got those jobs because you got out of the heat and you were moved into the air conditioner, working in the offices. But eventually, you know what? I started to become miserable. Right now, what I was trying to say earlier was, I remember being like at a football get together with all my cousins, with the kids of the guys that were running this business, all my younger cousins, that we would hang out and we would watch football together on Sundays. And I remember the pit that I would get in my stomach at the end of the day when the day was coming to an end, and I was starting to think about tomorrow on Monday morning having to go to work. And I remember the pit that I would get into my stomach of how much I dreaded going to a job. And that's when I realized that jobs weren't for me. And that's when I started working. I remember I also worked at Kentucky Fried Chicken because I had a cousin of mine that was worked in administration. He had a big position at Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I used to go work. He gave me a job over there, and I would work at American Blind, and then I would go work at Kentucky Fried Chicken a couple days during the week so that I could have money to party on the weekends, because we partied, we went out, we danced, we went to the clubs, we had a good time. I remember taking a shower inside the Kentucky Fried Chicken in the sink because my house was so far from where I worked that I didn't have time to go home and get ready because we were going to go out right after we finished at the restaurant. And I remember doing that. That was such a good time with my cousins and going out and dancing. What a good time we had. And then eventually I started to do my own selling of window treatments, and that's when everything changed for me. That's when I started making my own money, started my own business. That was like my own business that I started on my own, and I would go to homes, measure the windows, and I started doing what my dad did when he used to work in the beginning when he came from Cuba, and I started to sell window treatments and make my own profits and make my own money at the same time as I worked at the factory with my dad. I did that, and I would sell the blinds, and I would buy the blinds from my father, and then I would sell them retail, and I would install them, and I did that for many years until finally I stopped working at American Blind, and I just was working for myself doing window treatments. And then I remember when the income really shot up for me was when Hurricane Andrew came through South Florida and did some serious damage in South Florida, and that's another conversation. You can look that up. Hurricane Andrew was something serious. Came through South Florida and destroyed South Florida, and then they started rebuilding. And when they started rebuilding, eventually they got to the windows and they needed window treatments. And we were rocking. I was making $40,000 a month in my 20s. I remember me and I had a couple of friends of mine that we were working together back then, and we had a little office, and we were doing the blinds together. We were working together, and we were making so much money. We would rent limousines to go party on the weekend. We were kids. We were in our 20s, having a good time. That's why I'm always preaching to you guys. Make it happen young. Make sure you're involved in a field that makes good money and do well. Work on your financial independence in your 20s and your 30s, so you don't have to be working so hard in your 40s or 50s and trying to get financially independent and chasing the dollar bill your whole life. Get it done early. It was a lot of fun, man. We had such a good time, but you know what? We didn't do the right things with our money. We didn't save our money. We wasted it and blew it all the time. Didn't last. Young, we were dumb. We were just not on point when it came to investing money. At least I wasn't. I was always out burning it up and just burning the candle at both ends and living life, enjoying myself. And now I'm going to get into some other stuff. I remember Richard and I wanted to move out. We wanted to get our own place. Richard still lived over there in Carroll City, and I lived there with my parents. And I wanted to move out to an apartment near where we were living, near where I lived with my parents. And I remember sitting in the backyard one day with my old man talking, and him telling me, "Why are you gonna move out, man?" And I'm telling you guys this so that you guys, the young ones, some of you that still live at home with your parents, that are coming up, young people, because I know there's a lot of young people that watch my podcast. He said to me, "Why are you going to move out? You got everything you need here. You have your own car. Nobody bothers you, tells you when to come and go. You come and go at whatever time you want. You get your laundry done. You get your food cooked. You don't have to pay for anything. Every dime that you make is your money. You do with it what you want. Why would you want to move out?" And I said, I just wanted to move out because I just wanted to be independent. I wanted to be able to, do my thing whenever I wanted at my place, bring over whoever I wanted. Because, obviously there's rules in people's home. And when you live with your parents, you can't just do whatever you want. I wanted to be able to do whatever I want and just be free at my place and do, that's at least what I thought was important. And I remember moving in, and me and Richard and I, we got a nice little place there in Kendall, and biggest mistake I ever made was doing that. I'm not going to get into that story, but my friend Richard had a son, Christopher. Christopher was a little kid, and Richard brought Christopher to live with us. That was the deal. It was going to be him and Christopher and me, and that's how we were going to afford our own little apartment. And uh, you know, sometimes Richard would get home with Christopher, and I'd be in the apartment with my friends doing things that weren't appropriate for Christopher to see. It was not cool. We were partying. We were doing things that drinking, making noise, being rambunctious, and the girls and that, and Richard just wasn't into that at that time. Yeah, Richard was way more grown up than I. Yeah, Richard had already gotten to another level in his life personally. He was way more grown up than I. I was still a punk. I was still being immature and partying and just being irresponsible. Period. Not doing the right things. And Richard, you know, he decided that he would, talk to my dad and, see if he could get me to, change my ways or stop doing what I was doing. And, I looked at it all wrong. I looked at it all wrong when he did that. And I got really upset with him. And, I looked at it like he was throwing me under the bus. And he wasn't throwing me under the bus. He was just trying to help me out. And because I did it to my sister, the same thing that he did to me, I did to my sister later on when I saw that she was doing something real bad when she was younger. So I remember that was the worst mistake that I ever made. I made a major scar in our relationship, and Richard and I relationship. I got super upset with Richard. I moved out. He moved out, or he stayed there living. I don't know, but I left the very next day because my dad, when I was walking into the factory one day in the morning, I remember I think I still worked there. I went back to work there to make more money. I don't know what it was, but I was working at the factory, and he tells me that, hey, I want to talk to you, boom, boom, boom. That's when he gets into the stuff with Richard, and he starts telling me some of the things. I'm like, dude, for real? He talked to you, he told you those things, and boom, boom, and I got upset, and I looked at it as betrayal, and it wasn't betrayal. It was my best friend looking out for me, and I had my head up my butt, and I made a bad choice, and I stopped talking to Richard. And I spent years without talking to him. And it was the worst thing that I ever did. I missed out on years of friendship with my boy for a long time. We're good now. We're best friends. We picked up right where we left off. I'm going to tell you that now. But he persisted. He would call. I remember he would call, and I think I mentioned this on another one of my podcasts. But he persisted. He didn't give up. And I thank you, Richard, for never giving up, man. Because we're friends now because you didn't give up. I had given up. I was ready to never talk to him again. And what a waste that would have been of a brother. Like I was ready to make one of the biggest mistakes that I would have made in my life if I would have never gotten back together with my friend Richard. And he persisted, and he would call every year on my birthday. And I remember my mom would always hand me a little piece of paper on my birthday with Richard's new number, because whenever he would change his number or whatever, he would tell me, Richard called you, said happy birthday. He said to give him a call. And years went by. Years went by, and I remember moving to Mississippi. I remember going back when I went back to my parents' house, and I'm pretty sure this is what had happened. I moved to Mississippi after a few months of living with my parents because my cousin lived. He was stationed in Mississippi over there in the Navy, and he asked me to move over there with him, and if I wanted to go live over there, because I told him I wasn't happy in Florida, I wasn't having fun or whatever. I was burnt out of Miami, whatever it was, a stupid move. You can't run away from your issues, people. You got to deal with them, charge them dead on, and deal with your stuff. And I was just trying to leave everything, all the BS behind that I thought that it was a good move. And I went to Mississippi, and over there in Mississippi, I worked, I did blinds, I sold blinds. That's when I experienced racism at a level that I had never experienced. I had never known what it felt like to be discriminated against until I went to Mississippi, because they discriminated against Latin people over there, and it was not good. It was not a good feeling. It was horrible. To make that long story short, I came back to my parents' house again, and I remember one of those birthdays where my mom hands me a little piece of paper and tells me, Richard called you, he wants you to call him. And I called him, and we talked. I went to see him, and we picked up right where we left off. It's like that little part of our life, that negative part of our life never even existed. We don't even talk about it anymore. And we're still best friends today, and I'm blessed to have that man as my best friend, my brother. He called me yesterday to say happy birthday to me, and it was uh, it was awesome. It was awesome. I love my boy. He's Richard. I love you, bro. Thank you for never giving up on me. So let's talk about this. I remember one day waking up with my neck stiff. I couldn't move my neck. For some reason, I was stuck. My neck was stiff. I couldn't move it. I was young, still in my 20s. I think I was still in my 20s living with my parents. And I don't know what the heck was wrong, but my mother took me to the doctor to see the doctor. And after running a million tests, the doctor says to me, "You know why your neck is stiff? Because you're stressed out. You have too much stress." And I'm like, why stress? I couldn't know. I didn't get it. And I guess I just worried too much about whatever was going on in my life. I guess I was too stressed out. And that's when I learned how important it is not to worry about stuff, man. Not to worry about the small stuff and it's all small stuff. Worrying doesn't solve your problems, man. Charging at your problems and dealing with them is what solves your problems. Worrying is not going to fix anything. All it does is make you sick. And thank God that I learned that so young in my life, because after that, I didn't worry about stupid things anymore. Okay. And now I'm going to keep moving forward. I remember uh, that I got into doing kitchens and I started working with Tito. What's up, Tito? I love you, bro. And I started working another one of my best friends that I grew up with. And Tito invited me to go and work with him and do kitchens. We were doing industrial kitchens, and that was another uh, part of my entrepreneurial journey. What an exciting time that was. That was pretty cool. We were building big, giant $1 million kitchens, like kitchens for Wayne Heisinger's country club up north, and kitchens for Rainforest Cafe. I remember working on a bunch of kitchens there. That was an amazing run. We would get in the car and we would have to travel. Sometimes we would go on road trips that would take 8-10 hours to get there, and we would be getting paid. This guy would pay us. David would pay us to this guy. David was skilled. He was like one of the only people that knew how to do what we did. He was awesome, and that's why he made so much money and paid us very well. And I remember working with him in the kitchen business, and we would go everywhere. He would pay us while we traveled. We even went to an island once to do a kitchen, and we would cut counters. He would a counter that wouldn't fit through the door that measured 120 feet or 50 feet, and it was super big and went across the side of the restaurant, and it was huge, whatever, 30 feet, 20 feet, and it wouldn't fit through the door. Sometimes we would have to cut it in half. We would cut it in half. We would weld it back together again and polish it where you couldn't even tell that we cut it in half. I remember Horacio working with us, and me bringing Horacio, another one of my best friends. And I'm going to get into that now, because that's when shortly before I started working with Tito in the kitchen business is when I got introduced to multi-level marketing, network marketing, guys. That's when I met Horacio and Chuchi Caballero, Jesus Caballero, two of my best friends today. I was with Chuchi yesterday and Horacio on FaceTime. We were talking. We're putting together a new business, us three, and it's super exciting, and you guys will find out about it. We're in the middle of that right now. But those guys I met in the network marketing industry, in the Amway business, and they weren't part of my business and I wasn't part of their business, but that's where I learned about reading books and personal development and listening to audio tapes that motivated you, or stories about the businesses we were building, and it's what built us up, it's what encouraged us, and going to seminars, live events, conventions that we would travel all over the country. I remember I had a massive firearm collection back in those days, and I sold it and pawned it all just to go on these conventions. I sold my golf clubs, I sold my jewelry, I sold everything that I had to go to conventions, because it was so important. And they would tell you, you got to go, you got to be there, you got to go. If you want to have a successful business, you got to be at these events. We didn't make much money in the Amway business, guys, but I made a couple of friends in that business that are today to this day brothers of mine, best friends of mine that we talk and communicate all the time, still stay in touch. We grew together as men. We grew personal development together. We read books. We did all these things on our own. It was amazing, an amazing run. And to this day, we are able to apply all the things that we learned in that business. And I still talk about how important it is to read books and have personal development. Read books like this one, The Value Factor, How to Win Friends and Influence People. There is just so many good books out there that will change your game if you read and work on yourself. I'm not going to get into that because I talk about it all the time. I want to keep going here. And like I said, yeah, and then Horacio eventually came to work with me while we were doing other things, and worked with me in the kitchen business, and we worked together for many years, Tito, him, and I, and it was a freaking amazing time. We traveled all over the country doing kitchens together, and it was fun, like unbelievable learning experience. Great time that we had together. Then I remember that I was away. I was away on a trip, and I remember that I was on my way home with my cousin George, that was driving back home from wherever he was, and driving to Miami. And I was in Tallahassee, and he says to me, "If you want, I'll pick you up," because he knew that I needed a ride back home. I didn't have a car at that time, or I didn't drive there. I don't know, whatever it was. But he says to me, "If you want, I'll pick you up on the way back to Miami." I said, "Man, that would be great." Boom, boom, boom. I had my stuff ready. He picked me up, and about halfway home, about 4 hours, I think there was probably about 4 hours left in our trip, I get a phone call from my little sister, from Zuli. And she was young. She was still young back then. I think Zuli might have been in her 20s. And I guess she didn't get that it wasn't cool, but she did it anyways. And she tells me, whatever. She just wanted to tell me, and called me and said that right there in the car while I was driving with my cousin George, that my father had passed away. And I was 4 hours away from home, so I couldn't do anything. I had to just wait to get to my house, to get to my parents' house, because I still lived with my parents back then. And it was not cool, man. It was a very sad experience. I missed my old man. He was a good dude. I remember getting home after 4 hours, and he was still there. They hadn't taken him yet, and all my family was there, and everybody was there, and it was not fun. Obviously I missed my dad, but I went from living a carefree life and doing whatever I wanted, to having to take over my father's business. And my father at the time, and I'm just going to touch base on this because I hate to talk about ugly things, but my father had issues with his partners, with the manufacturing plant of blinds. And my father was hard headed sometimes, and he just didn't put up with bullshit, and whatever happened between them, I don't know the whole story, but they bought him out, for peanuts. And he started up his own little factory. It was a little factory, a little hole in the wall factory, a couple thousand square feet of manufacturing blinds, and then he would buy little mini blinds from them, because they still stayed friends or whatever. They just didn't work together anymore. And I went from living the carefree life to having over $6,000 a month in bills that I was responsible for. All of a sudden, I was responsible for everything, because remember, my mom didn't work. So my sister was going to college and doing a little bit of working, I think, and I became all of a sudden the head of the house, and I still had my head up my butt. I was still irresponsible. I was still not on point. I was still messing around and blowing all my money all the time. Before that, all of a sudden, I have to become this guy that's in charge of everything around the house. And I remember sitting in the factory by myself because he worked pretty much by himself. He had a partner that he would work with once in a while, showed up and worked, and was there. And then eventually he took off, and I stayed by myself working the factory. And every once in a while I would be there, and there was a hat that hung on the one of the racks on one of the lines where I used to build the blinds, and it was his hat, my dad's. I never touched it. I left it there. And every time I would look at that hat, sometimes I would just start bawling because it was not cool, man. I remember when I got in there and I opened up the checkbook and I saw that the checkbook was negative. I don't know how much. It was negative a couple $100. He didn't have a lot of money saved up. He had a nice life insurance policy that he left my mom, so my mom was able to pay off the house and stuff like that. But like I said, I was still, not grown up, in my 30s probably back then. And one of the things that he told my mom, he said, don't lose the house. If the kids are not on point and they're not helping you with the house, sell the house. Sell the house and get yourself a little place, pay it off, and you'll have some extra money. You'll have money from the policy. And after a little while, that's what she did. She sold the house. And, all that was very, very shocking experience for me, because I remember going through it. I remember my mom selling all the stuff from inside the house and all the furniture, because she moved into a little apartment in Hialeah that she bought. And I remember eventually she moved into the little apartment while the house was on the market. It didn't take long to sell. And I remember still living there until it sold with my sister, and still being irresponsible, still partying, still focused on just having fun and not really focused on my finances. Yeah, I started businesses. Yeah, I worked. Yeah, I made money. Yeah, I did that stuff, but I was still not responsible, and I would just blow it as it came in. And I remember Zuli having to go live on her own, and me having to go live on my own. I rented a little efficiency. My mom had her little place on the beach, and then I would be living in the little efficiency, and I was still working at the factory, working the factory on my own. Now it was my factory. I wasn't responsible for the $6,000 in bills anymore. I was just responsible for my, $300 a month that I paid for an efficiency back then. That it was a little room with a little bathroom and a little area to, heat some stuff up with a microwave, and just a little bedroom on the side of a house, an efficiency. And I did that for a while, and I was not happy. I remember, like I told you guys, I was not a big fan of the whole factory and building the blinds. Even when I was the owner of the company, and I would make a little bit of money with some of the clients. I started calling all the clients that owed my dad money, and they started paying or whatever. But I had a ceiling of income, and I just wasn't happy with what I was making, and I wasn't enjoying it. Because, as I tell you guys, whatever you do for your finances, make sure you get involved in a business that you're passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about it, you're not gonna take it to the next level. It's not gonna be successful, and that's what happened. I did that for a while, and then my cousin had retired from the Navy, and he started selling cars. Okay. And I'll never forget, I was talking to him one day after he had been here for a couple of months already, in Fort Lauderdale. I think he was living, and he was working at a little tiny dealership that's closed down now. It's out of business. It was called Kelly Chevrolet. And he called me. I'm talking to him one day, and I go, "How you doing, primo? How's everything going? How's the car business?" He goes, "Well, I made $8,000 last month." I was like, "What?" And that was a lot of money back then. I was like, "What?" I couldn't believe it. I was like, "You made that much money selling cars?" Nowhere near what I was making with the blinds in the little factory. So I was like, "Listen, get me an interview, and I want to start working there, and I want to start selling cars." It was a lot less stress to go do that. I got the interview. I got the job. I sold all the equipment at the factory. I shut down the factory, and I went to sell cars. And I sold cars for 10 years. Let me tell you, the car business was an amazing journey. I don't recommend it to people that are married, because if you want to make money in the car business, you got to be there from bell to bell. You got to be there all the time. If you're not there, you'll lose deals and you'll lose money. Okay? Now, when I was working in the car business, I remember when I first started, I got to move here because I know I've been talking for a while already. I remember when I first started in the business, in the car business, and this is just tips for you guys that are thinking about getting in the car business, okay? And I got in the car business and I was green. What that means is that I was a rookie. I didn't know anything about the car business. I got in, I started going through the training, and they put me on the floor, and I started taking ups. Ups are called our customers, people that walk in, they walk up to the dealership, which now I know that doesn't happen a lot because now there's so much buying online and the internet, and it changed everything, but that didn't exist back then. The internet came into play when I was in the car business, I remember. And I remember that I would take every customer, no prejudging. I didn't prejudge anybody. Anybody that walked up to that dealership, I was coming up to talk to them. If I was on the lot and they were in the lot walking, I would go up to talk to them. And I talked to every single person that I could talk to, as long as it was my turn or was somebody who was walking around, because there were so many salesmen, and so many salesmen would just prejudge people, and if you didn't look like a buyer, they wouldn't talk to you. They wouldn't lose their up because we had we were in a line, we were on a list on whose turn it was to take the next customer. And you could usually tell when it was somebody's up and they let it go and they didn't want to talk to it. And I would see them on the lot by themselves, and I would go up and talk to them. And the first month, I talked to every single person I could talk to, and I sold 18 cars. I made like $9,000. I crushed it because we got paid so much money on Corvettes. It was a big deal. We got paid huge commissions in the car business back then. I don't think they make that much money now from what I've heard in the car business, but let me tell you, it was a good time. It was a great learning experience for me, the car business. It gave me the alligator skin that I learned in that business, to not be offended by people and take anything personal when you're working or you're doing sales. I learned how to get tough and how to deal with people in that business. Now, while I was selling cars in that business, I'm gonna cruise now because I know I've been talking for almost an hour. Um, I was introduced to another network marketing business. Okay. And at this point, I had learned a lot. I've gotten a lot of experience. I'd gotten my feet wet in that industry. I learned a lot in the car business. So I have a lot of alligator skin now. I had very little fear of talking to anybody about anything. And I was introduced to a company called Excel Communications. And I met Carlos Ray, which I've had on here on the podcast, which back then he was the number one income earner in the company. And it was an amazing run with Carlos. I learned so much with him. I remember he would wake me up in the morning. What are you doing? Are you up? He would call me at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. Are you ready? And I remember when I eventually started doing Excel full time, making a little bit of money. It wasn't great money, but we were making a little bit of money. I got promoted really fast. I went through the levels really fast because I hammered it, I worked it, and I did my thing. And working with this guy was amazing. This guy was the number one income earner. This guy was amazing. This guy would speak, and like anywhere, everybody would sign up. He would speak at the conventions in front of hundreds of thousands of people. We went over that. If you watch the podcast with him, he talks about all that. And I got to work with him for a long time. Well, during that run with Carlos, he opened up an office in Coral Gables, a super beautiful, fancy office. I had my own office inside the office there. So did some other representatives that worked for Excel Communications that worked in that office. Excel Communications back then was the fastest growing company in American business history, guys. It hit $1 billion before Microsoft hit $1 billion. Okay, it was an amazing run with a freaking amazing company back then. I'll tell you what happens there at the end now in a minute. But while I was there, my life takes a big turn, man. And I'm going to get into this because it's super important to me. I remember I was, let me go back a little bit. I remember in all this, in all these other things that I've been doing in the car business, in Excel and all this, I was going through this thing where I had an emptiness and I couldn't fill it. I had like a hole in me and I just didn't know what it was. And I couldn't feel it. And I remember I hadn't been going to church for years now. Now, at this point in my life, I'm not going to church with my mom every Sunday like I used to go. But my mom is still going to church every Sunday. And I start, in conversation with my mom, because I talk to my mom all the time. And I tell my mom, I go, Mom, I want to go to church with you because I knew that it was that. I knew that the emptiness that I felt, it didn't matter how much money I was making. It didn't matter who I was associated with. It didn't matter nothing. I had an emptiness in me that I couldn't figure out what. And I thought, and I knew it was, but I thought like there's something missing in my life. And I knew it was that. And I would go to church with her and I would go to church with her and I would go to church with her, but nothing, nothing. I'm still feeling this way. I'm still feeling uncomfortable. I'm still feeling the emptiness. And I, I'm in a meeting with Carlos in his office, and he says, "Listen, I got this new IBO, independent business owner. I got this new IBO that signed up. His name is Rich, and guys, remember I tell you guys about people that are going to come into your life for a long time." Okay, that are going to be your friends forever, like Richard and Marcel and Tito. Okay, those guys are my best friends from when I was a little kid, and they're still my best friends. We still get together every year. And we go on guide trips, and we have a great time. We're best friends, brothers. Okay, but there's going to be people that are going to come into your life only for a season, for a reason. Okay, and Carlos tells me I have this guy. His name is Rich, and he needs some training just to get his feet wet, and you're doing real well. I want you to bring him with you, drive around with him, do your thing with him while you're out and about during the day. Take him with you just so they can see how you do what you do. And, you know, I started to become friends with Rich, and we started to drive around and work together. And I remember one day we're sitting in the conference room at the Coral Gables office, and he looks at me. I mean, I get really excited about this. This is probably going to be my favorite part of the podcast. And he looks at me and he says to me, "Man, Rich, I hope you see this podcast, man, and reach out to me. I haven't talked to you in years, and I would love to talk to you." And Rich says to me, looks at me right in the face, and he goes, "Randy, are you saved?" And let me tell you guys, I've grown up as a Catholic, going to Catholic school. I grew up as an altar boy, going to the church with my mom all the time, okay? But I didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus. Rich tells me, "Randy, are you saved?" And I tell him straight up, I go, "What does that mean, Rich?" I hear that a lot because at that point I would see Billy Graham on TV, I would see TBN, and I would see these people talking and all the excitement and be saved and be saved, and I just didn't get the message yet. And Rich tells me, asks me, "Are you saved?" I go, "What does that mean, Rich? What do you mean by being saved?" He goes, "Well, do you believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross for your sins?" I go, "Yes, absolutely. I was raised as a Catholic." Boom, 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 boom. "But do you have a personal relationship with Jesus, Randy?" And I go, "What do you mean, man?" He goes, "Do you have a relationship with God?" I go, "Well, I pray every day. I do this." He goes, "No, no." He goes to me, will you go to church with me?" It was a Wednesday. He goes, "Will you go to church with me?" And he took me to his church, Calvary Chapel of Fort Lauderdale. And Pastor Bob was the pastor of the church. He was the head pastor of the church back then. And I'll never forget the experience. I'm sitting in the church with Rich and Bob, because that's what everybody called him, Pastor Bob, but everybody called him Bob. And Bob was talking, and there must have been 3,000 people sitting in that church that day. And I felt like Bob was talking directly to me, and specifically to me. The whole time I could feel the seat moving. I could feel God working in me, touching me like, "You're in the right place now, buddy." And I remember, because Pastor Bob always at the end of his Bible study would say, "If you are new here and you would like to accept Jesus into your heart and start a relationship with the Lord," and he starts to do the part of the church where he starts to welcome people to the church and get people to come to the front to accept Jesus into their heart and get saved and start following Jesus and go on the right path, right? And get a personal relationship with the Lord and say the prayer, the Lord's Prayer, and say the prayer to accept Jesus in your heart, okay? And I remember that Rich leans over and says to me, "Randy," I'll never forget this, man. He says, "Randy, if you want to walk up, I'll walk up with you." And I said, "Let's go." And I stood up and I walked up. And I accepted Jesus into my heart. I said the small prayer. Do you believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins? Do you accept him? Do you accept him as your Lord and Savior? I accepted him as my Lord and Savior. They give you a Bible. You start your journey. Okay. And I started going. I remember I lost my car after that. And I started going to the church every week. I would go twice a week. I think 2 or 3 times a week I would go. I remember because I would take a bus, a train, the rail. It would take me forever to get there from Miami to Fort Lauderdale. And I was doing it 3 times a week because I was on fire for the Lord. I got saved, and that's when I accepted Jesus into my life. And it was around the year 2000. And that's when my life changed. That's when I started living. That's when I started spending time in the morning praying, reading my Bible, and working on my relationship with God every single day in the morning, living in spirit, praying, spending time with God. Don't get me wrong, throughout these last 25 years, there has been times where I have backslidden, where I stopped going to church, my walk is not as strong and as focused as it should be. Always prayed, always maintained my relationship whether it was 5 or 10 minutes in the morning praying or during the day or whenever it was, or it was all, I would spend an hour in the morning like I do now, almost an hour in the morning every day before I start my day, praying and spending time with God. And that's when my life changed. That's when everything went to another level. That's when I started living happy again, enjoying my day, no matter if I was doing good financially, doing bad financially. And that's when I met my other best friend, Bud Nemeth, at that Coral Gables office. And Bud, I remember we would get together in the morning in the conference office, and Bud would break open his Bible, and we would have our little Bible study, little prayer in the morning there, and talk about God for a little while before we started working every day. And that's when I really learned how to have my devotionals in the morning and spend time with God and start my day with the Lord, was with Bud. And still to this day, Mr. Bud Nemeth, which I've brought on here, you guys have met him. He's one of my best friends in the whole world. He's my brother. We talk all the time. What's up, Budro? I love you, man. And I remember Bud Nemeth getting me going, and that's when my relationship with Bud started. Now, back then, I had an issue that I had with whatever. I don't want to get into it, but I didn't want to work in that position that I had in Excel where I was. I wanted to work with Bud personally, and I wasn't able to work with him personally, like be part of his business where he received commissions from whatever I built or whatever I did, because I wasn't part of his business. And the only way that I could do that, and I wanted to work with him because I had become such good friends with Bud, and we worked together for a long time, but we were working his business, and he was working his business, and I was working my business. And it got to the point where I wanted to be part of his business and be part of his family in the business and his family, and be part of his life on a daily, because I love this guy. He was my partner, he's my friend, he taught me so much. And the only way that I could do it was by giving up my position, stopping it, and I had to wait a whole year. That was the way the contract worked with the company. I had to wait a whole year and not do anything and start over again from scratch. And I was willing to do that. And I started that. I sold my position and I waited. And then I started working. I remember I was at that time carless because I was borrowing, I think, Tito's truck back then. I was using it. He let me use it for a while, and then he needed it back, and I didn't have a car because I had repoed my car a while back. And I started, a friend of mine at Calvary Chapel, a guy that I've met at Calvary Chapel, Chris, asked me if because he saw that I was struggling. I was living in a little tiny place on the beach with my aunt, and I was driving her crazy over there. She was an older lady, and I was just like, it was a tiny little room. It was little. It had 2 little beds in it with a little kitchen and a little bathroom. And, I was in my 30s living life and partying, and she was, 70s. she was old, and I was just driving her crazy with all my BS there. So I wanted to leave there because driving her crazy made her miserable, which made me miserable. So Rich, talking to Chris. Chris is a guy that is a friend of mine that I met in the Bible study at the church, offered for me to live with him, and he lived over there in Fort Lauderdale. So I went to go live with him, and he had an extra room because his wife was in the military. She had gone to boot camp, so he had room for me to go live with him, and he offered for me to live there with him and just give him whatever I can give him while I put my life back together again, because I didn't have a car, I didn't have nothing. I was trying to get a good job, a decent job, doing something commission wise, but without a car, it was kind of a mission for me. And back then there wasn't Ubers or anything like that, so it was either haul a bus or a taxi or something like that, and it was just a pain. So you know what I did? Right across the street from that apartment building, there was a Publix, and I walked across. I'll never forget this, man. I walked across the street to the Publix, and at the Publix, I walked in, and I was dressed in a suit, in my shirt and tie that I was used to dressing all the time when I worked the network marketing business with Excel and stuff. And I walked in, I did the interview with the manager, and he goes, nobody's ever come here dressed in a suit for an interview, man. And I told him that I needed a job. He offered me a job working in the deli. I forgot how much he offered me, like $10, $11. And I started working in the deli there. And I did that for a while, and I would save my checks one after the other. I would just save them. I would get Chris a little bit of money. I would go every couple of weeks to the bank that was far as hell from where I was, the credit union, the public credit union, to deposit and cash the checks. And then I would give him a little bit of money, and I would save my money. And eventually I was able to get a little car. And I did that for a little while. And then Bud had moved to Texas because the company that we were working for, Excel Communications, had launched local telephone service. They had deregulated the bells back then, which was the local telephone that you had in your home that was a wired plugged into your wall. They had deregulated that service because back then it was like FP&L here in Florida, the power company, that there's only one power company. You're not going to get your electricity from one company. Well, back then it was the same thing with the telephone companies. There was Southern Bell. You could only get your phone service from Southern Well. Well, they deregulated that industry, and now other companies were able to offer telephone service, and Texas was one of the first states to get deregulated, and Bud had moved over there. Bud had a high position in Excel already. He was doing very well. And he moved to Texas. And when he moved to Texas, he left this great giant kind of like an apartment that was at the top of his mother-in-law's house, Mam's house, Courtney's mom, Bud's wife, Courtney's mom, Mam, and they offered me to live if I wanted to. Bud asked me if I wanted to live up there. That I forgot how much I would give her every month. There was a Publix that was nearby there. He offered the place to me because he had left to Texas, and then I could go over there and live in that place, and then wait. And at this point, almost a year had already gone by. I think the year had gone by already, and I was already had signed up under him, and I was working at Publix and living in that place and on the second floor of Mam's home. And I had my head up my butt again. I'm not responsible. All I'm doing now is just partying, smoking cigarettes, drinking, partying, working at Publix, going out, having fun. Back in the business with Bud, but I'm not doing anything. I'm not working it. I'm not making it happen. Okay? I'm just like totally off. I'm just going to scratch off here so I can make sure that I stay on point here. Okay? And Bud comes to visit me. They come to visit, Courtney's family. They come to Florida, to Miami, to visit one weekend. And while he's visiting, he offers me to go back to Texas with him. He had an extra couple. He actually had a couple extra bedrooms upstairs in a beautiful home in this little city called McKinney, Texas. And he offered me to go live with him over there in Texas. And let me tell you guys, I jumped on it, okay? I jumped on the decision to move over there with him. My car had broken. So it was parked outside the house there where I was living with Ma'am. I remember it was broken. It had recently just broke. Something happened to it. It would cost a lot of money to fix it. So I never got it fixed. We took it to Texas. And then we sold it or they came and picked it up or whatever. But I remember moving to Texas with him. I remember driving the U-Haul truck with all the stuff because Bud also brought a bunch of his stuff that he had still there, my stuff, put it in this big giant truck, and we drove to Texas. They drove in a car with the kids. Bud had two little daughters, Courtney and Kaylee, Kaylee and Bailey, and Courtney and Bud, and all four of them are driving. Cooper wasn't born yet, and we're driving to Texas, and I'm in this big giant U-Haul truck following them. And every once in a while, you could feel the truck would do one of these, and it would feel like it was going to tip over because you couldn't go too fast. The minute you started going too fast, it would start doing this kind of stuff, and it felt like the truck was going to tip over, so I had to slow down. I'll never forget that. That was crazy. We get to Texas, and we're working in Texas. Now, I remember in Texas, we start building the business, and I'm not going to get into the details because we got to move here. I'm already past an hour on the podcast. I hope you guys are still watching. This is a good story. It's going to get real good. I get into it. I go. We're working it in Texas. We have this one big giant office downstairs of the house. And we're going to work the business differently now because back in the day, we would work the business one-on-one. We would meet with people at the restaurants, at Denny's, at Dunkin' Donuts, have meetings, show the business in living rooms, and do the network marketing MLM. If you guys know about it, that's how it was done. Well, Bud and Rick wanted to change. Rick was Bud's big partner in the business. He was also in the top position with him, and they wanted to do something different. They wanted to work. They wanted to be able to build this business from home on your phone on the internet because now the internet was going. Now people were starting to use the business, the computers, the internet. It was already very popular. People were using it. We started to build the business online. Okay, and to make a long story short, guys, we worked that business on that phone every single day, pounded it. We built the business to over 27 states. We had massive success. It was freaking awesome. Okay, we did great. We launched a local telephone service there in Texas, and then they started deregulating the state of Florida, and we moved from Texas to Orlando. Okay, and when we moved to Orlando, we're doing good. I'm still living with Bud in his house. He gets a big giant house in Orlando, near where I eventually go get my own apartment, and then he goes and moves into this beautiful neighborhood called Windermere, where Shaq and Tiger Woods lived, and Bud was living in this big giant house there in Windermere, and I get my own little appointment, my little apartment in Orlando, and I'm financially independent, man. I'm making great money every month, having a couple meetings from my house on the internet, on Zooms, there wasn't Zoom back there, but it was similar. We used a similar service. Everything was being done online. We talked to our teams online. We worked. We helped gather customers. We did everything from the computer, via the camera, via the internet. It was amazing, okay? And I'll never forget, Bud calls me on an April Fool's, and that's why I hate talking to Bud on April 1st, and he'll attest to that. I stay away from him. I try not to talk to him on April 1st because he loves to do April Fool's jokes on me, and he freaking freaks me out sometimes. Well, he calls me on April 1st that year, and I answer the phone. I don't remember exactly what year it was. But we were living in Orlando. We were doing very well. I was living financially independent, living in my own little apartment, beautiful little place, a little gym, pool. It was awesome. And I remember he calls me on April Fool's and he tells me that Excel Communications was filing Chapter 13 and they're going out of business. And I thought he was messing around with me. It's April Fool's, but I'm not dumb. I know it's April Fool's. You're just playing jokes on me. And he was telling me the truth. He was telling me the truth. The company was filing Chapter 13 and eventually went out of business. We all stopped getting paid. They did what they had to do. All the distributors got messed up. We didn't get paid anymore. We had to all start over. I had to go get a job. I had to go back to the workforce. I'll never forget that time in my life. It was not cool. I eventually, what I did was, I went right back to what I knew. I went to the blinds business and I started doing that for a while. And again, I was unhappy. I thought that would make me, I would make money. I was very experienced. I went to the manufacturing level. I was working with a big manufacturer, but no, I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it anymore. I did it for a little while to pay the bills. And then I went back to the car business and I started selling cars again. And I did that for a while I was in Orlando. And just looking here at my notes, and I remember the struggle at the factory working with these people, and I remember the struggle. And finally, one day, I just decided to go into the car business. I found the car dealer. I went back to the car business, and I started selling cars. And I was working in Orlando for a while, and I wasn't happy anymore over there in Orlando. I wanted to come back to Miami. I missed my family. I missed everybody over here, my mom, my sister, everybody over here on this side, and I wanted to come back. And I remember my cousin Oliver was going to be coming through Orlando. He was moving to I would think he was moving back to Miami for a while. He was thinking about it was happening, and he says to me, I'm talking to him, and I let him know that I want to go back to Miami, and I eventually end up coming back to Miami, and my sister owned a home by herself that she lived in, and I went to go live with my sister there, and that's when I'm looking through the newspaper and the want ads looking for a job, and I run into this ad of this company called Synergy Health, and I go work for this company called Synergy Health, and I get into the health insurance industry. And it was a call center. I went to go work on the phone. I got to start moving quick here. I get on this job, and they put me on the phone, and I'm good, man. I get on the phone, I start doing good. I start selling, and we weren't selling health insurance. We were selling little discount plans, little health insurance discount plans. They weren't real health insurance yet. Obamacare didn't exist yet, and we did that for a while. And I remember one day I'm walking in the building, and I'll call him Senor Blanco because I learned a lot from this guy. He was a good dude. I miss him. I want to see him one day again. I hope he's doing well. Tom, I miss you, brother. I hope all is well with you. Mr. Blanco, I want to see you again one day. Reach out to me if you see this. And Senor Blanco's waiting for me outside, and he says, listen, I had already been there for a couple of months, and I guess he was having an issue with one of his managers, and he offered me a management position. And I started working with him as a manager. It was a tiny little call center at that point. I think we had like 25 agents on the phone. And I remember we moved like 3 or 4 times into the point that we got to an office that had over 100 agents on the phone. They came out with this limited medical plan that came out back in those days. And we were selling 400 and 500 policies a day. And we had to get licensed to be able to sell those policies. I remember that we all had to start getting a real health insurance license, or 215s, I think they were called. And we got the life, health, and annuities license. And we all started doing classes on the weekends. On Sundays, we would come in, and this guy would come in, this instructor, and he would teach us, and he would go over the book with us. And, we did that for a few months until we all started going individually. We would go take the test with the state, and we all started getting our licenses, and we all got our licenses, and we started crushing it. We started doing fantastic, tearing it up in the business. And then the company did so well. This went on for years. I was doing really well. Eventually, I moved out of my sister's house. I moved into this little apartment near Synergy Health, and we were doing fantastic. And I remember being in my apartment, making fantastic money that I was making there with Tom at Synergy Health, and he was the director of sales. And I remember him being at my apartment one night, and I was drinking, I guess, and I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy because I was having a conversation with God, but it was a conversation after a couple brewskis, because I remember I was drinking, and I had a couple brewskis, and I was having a conversation with God, but I was angry, and I was talking with God. I was angry because I was alone. I was angry because I hadn't met a wife yet. All my friends were married. Richard was married. Tito was married. Marcel was married. Bud was married. All of my best friends had wives and kids, and I was the only one that was not married, didn't have any kids, didn't have nothing. And I was upset. And I was upset and I was, yelling. I was yelling at the sky. Why am I still single? What have I done? Why don't I have a wife? Why am I not married yet? And let me tell you, a couple of months after that, not long after that, I'm sitting. My cousin Oliver was in town. He was in the process of moving to Miami and getting stationed somewhere in Key West or the Keys. And he was staying at my house. And my cousin Marilu is calling him constantly to go out to a party that they're having at this little nightclub in Sunset, on Sunset Place, Martini Bar, I think it was called. And she's calling Oliver to get us to go out, and I don't feel like going out. It's a Friday. I'm tired. I don't want to go out. I'm laying on my couch. I'm watching TV. This is a couple of months after having that conversation with God about a spouse and a wife. And she keeps calling, trying to get us to go out. And finally, Oliver wants to go out. I was the one that didn't want to go out. And I remember finally I give in. Okay, let's go out. So we start getting ready. And I remember I was shaving because I was already bald. Okay. And I was shaving my head. And they didn't have razor blades back then like they have them now where you don't get cut. Okay. Like I got cut. It was like the size of a quarter. I'll never forget that day getting cut while I was shaving, ready to go out with Oliver and go meet up with Marilu at Martini Bar. And we get to the Martini Bar, and Marilu introduces us to a few people, and she introduces me to the birthday girl. The birthday girl has this little button on her shirt that's flashing, a little bottle cap with a little light. You know what I mean? It's flashing, and I'm doing my thing. I'm all dressed up. I think I'm hot shit. I'm out on the dance floor. I'm already drank a couple drinks, because liquid courage. You know what I mean? To drink liquid courage so you can talk to the girls, right? And I'm dancing with another girl on the dance floor, and the birthday girl walks near me, and I see the birthday girl, and I grab the birthday girl by the hand, and I say, "Come over here, birthday girl." And I get the birthday girl, and I start dancing with her, and the birthday girl, her name is Christy, and Christy Batista was her name at the time, and I dance with her all night. We have a blast all night long together, her and I. And all of a sudden, it's time to go. And I'm not paying too much attention, but her friends grab her and they take her and they leave. And I don't get her number. I don't know how to get in touch with this girl. She's gone. But while we were there that night hanging out, she had shown me this balloon that they had made her. There was one of those Mylar balloons, and it had her name on it. And there was only one balloon, and I grabbed it, and I took it with me. And I remember calling my cousin Marilu up and says, "Listen, tell your friend Christy that I want to meet her, that I want to see her, that I want to go, and I have her balloon. And if she wants it, she needs to give me her number, and I'll bring it to her myself." And Marilu again eventually talked to Christy, got her number, got me her number, and we started dating, and the rest is history, okay? She got it. We talked about that freaking balloon at our wedding vows. It was awesome. It was a good time. Now let's move because I'm moving now. I meet Nelson, okay? I meet Nelson, Christy's son, okay? My bonus son, I call him. And Nelson, he's little. I think Nelson must have been like 6 or 7 years old. And he was a little entertainer back then, man. We would be somewhere and Christy would have to be doing something, or Christy was taking care of her mom or doing something like that. And Nelson would be entertaining me. He would be singing songs to me. The Wiggles, he was into the Wiggles back then. He would be singing me every single song of the Wiggles. He knew it by heart. He was a little entertainer, that guy. Right now, he's 24 years old. I'm so proud of him. He's a voice actor. He works for this company doing voices. He does narrating. He's in animated films. He does all kinds of stuff. He's doing soap opera, dubbing. Amazing, amazing journey that this kid has been on. I'm super proud of him. He's doing super well, and just I can talk on and on, but we were tied for time. I just wanted to mention that. And then a couple years after getting married to my wife, not long after, because I don't think my wife wanted to have any more kids after that. And she finally, talks to me. We talk about it, and she tells me that yeah, she'll have a kid with me, and we eventually she gets pregnant. We get pregnant, and Chloe's born, and that's when my life changed. That little girl has changed my game. Now I can talk an hour about Chloe, my little double trouble monster that is a superstar. I'm super proud of her and all her achievements lately. But life changed that for me. I think that's when I started growing up. When my daughter was born, and life was amazing. That little girl has changed my life. I live vicariously through her, watching her play basketball and football. And she's a straight A student. She's on the principal's honor roll. She's an awesome kid. I love you so much, Chloe. Keep it up. The life was great. We had moved several times, adjusting because Chloe was going to be born. At this point, we're living at a place over there by by the by Baptist Hospital is a place. Then we moved to we moved to another place near Dolphin Mall over there. It was like a little one two. It was like a 3-bedroom, a room for Nelson, a room for Chloe's little room, and an apartment and a little room for us. And I was still working at Synergy Health, and this is when Synergy Health starts going through the downfall, and Synergy Health goes out of business eventually. And I eventually get into selling health insurance with a couple of partners of mine, a couple of guys that I went into business with. It wasn't the best situation, but we did make money. We built a great residual income, and I had a nice residual income there going, and I was able to pay the bills at home with my residual income from the insurance policies, while my wife had to go back to work after she had Chloe. And I got to be with Chloe every day. I was the one that would get her ready in the morning and prop her up on the little couch and take pictures of her and send it to my wife every day. And that was just an amazing experience for me. Eventually, the guy, Senor Blanco from Synergy Health, reaches out to me to get involved with him in another business. And a business that he's not getting involved with him, but to go work for him at this moving company. And he starts a moving business, and he has a call center. Brings me in, and to make a long story short, he hires me to run the call center, build the call center. I learn the business. I get on it. We start doing very well. I start making really good money, like really good money. And I tell my wife, okay, start saving the money. We're saving the money, and we buy our first home where we live now, where I am here now, and we have our own home now, and it's been an amazing journey. We have our house. We're paying for a house. It's awesome. It was an awesome experience finally buying our first home with the money that we made, that I was making there with her. She makes great money too. Thank God for her. And with my up and downs, with my entrepreneurial life, it's been a crazy ride. But she eventually, we have our home here. We're still working in the moving business. Now the moving business starts to have issues, and that they cut my pay in half one day, and I was still making good money. Even by cutting my pay in half, I was still making solid income. And then again, they come to cut my pay again. And at this point, it's too much of a cut. And I tell him, I go, listen, you got to give me a chance, to go find something else, because I can't make it with this. And I go back into the insurance business, and I start working with a friend of mine that has an agency in Boca. And I go working with him over there in the agency in Boca. Obamacare's out now, and it was like the second year of Obamacare. We did really well. We built up that agency really big, and we started doing good money there. But then I had my issues with him because it wasn't my business. I was working for him again, and I stopped. We had issues, and I am here at the house trying to figure something out, trying to do things on the side, making money here, little things here and there, but not making enough money to cover. And we start getting into trouble financially. We start getting behind on our home, on our mortgage payments, and it starts to get ugly. And I have a friend of mine, Mario, that Mario puts me together with a guy that he worked with before in the health insurance business, and he has his own company. He puts me together with this guy named Adam. This is when I meet Adam Awani. And Adam hires me to run his virtual call center. He has a call center, but instead of doing health insurance, he's doing health insurance leads, and this is when I get into the lead business, and I start working with Adam. And to make a long story short, with Adam, I start hiring. We start hiring people off Craigslist. We're doing ads on Craigslist, and we're meeting people on Craigslist. And he had a big, giant call center in the Philippines. Okay, and the Filipinos were costing him a certain amount of money, but I just didn't think the Filipinos were effective back in those days, and I didn't like that group of people that we were working with. So he wants to start hiring people here in the U.S., and we start hiring people here in the U.S. and start building the U.S. team. It starts going very well, okay? But the U.S. employees were very expensive, and in one of those ads that I'm running, this guy calls me and he says to me, "Listen, I want to work for you, but I don't live in the United States. I live in Nicaragua." And he tells me that he lives in another country. He lives in Nicaragua. And he tells me this, and I'm like, and his English is perfect. He had lived here for a long time, and he was living in Nicaragua now for whatever reason, and he couldn't come back here. And I talked to Adam about it, and he allows me to start hiring these people on my own, okay? And then I would just invoice him. And this is when I started building my company. I call marketing, and I start hiring these people in different countries. And this is when I start making serious money again. I start making fantastic income, over 5 figures a month I was making again. And I started making this money without saying anything to my wife. I was just saving it in the business account until I had enough, because we were super behind on the house. Like they were trying to repo our house already. And I remember on our way back home from Disney, on one of the trips where we go on vacation and we're coming back home from Disney, and I tell her, I have the money. She goes, "What do you mean?" I go, "I have the money. I made the money with Adam, with what I'm doing, with my team. I've made enough money. I've saved enough money to pay everything that we owe to Wells Fargo." And I called Wells Fargo in the morning and I sent them a wire, and I caught up to everything, and the whole bankruptcy ended, and the whole losing the home and the foreclosure and all that went away, and we came back and we were right back on our feet again. And that's why I told people, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. God has a plan and he'll fix it. And you just got to be out there swinging, doing what you got to do and make it happen. And we did that. I did that for a while with the leads, and it was fun. Sometimes the business had over 100 employees at one point, and I had Mario, and I had Mario running the company for me. And it got to the point where I just checked little things in the morning and checked the dollar and make sure that I had leads in there, and Mario was running the company for me. And I wasn't working with Adam anymore because the whole health insurance thing went down the drain with his clients. So I found my own clients, and I started doing my own thing and doing my own leads and making my own money, working for myself, and with I call marketing, and it was going wonderful. I remember I would have nothing to do during the day. I would go fishing. I was doing stuff, and I couldn't find people to hang out with because everybody was always working. I was making 5 figures a month and doing whatever I wanted with my time, because I had over 100 employees and people running my business for me. That I would be in meetings with them in the morning a little while, and then I was gone. I could do whatever I wanted, and it was amazing. And then I'm not going to get into the COVID era and all that kind of stuff, because it's in here. It's around this time right now where it happens. But I remember that I get introduced to the genetic testing industry, okay? And I learn about genetic testing and the genetic testing leads and pharmacogenomics. And if you want to look that up, you can look it up. I'm not going to get into this explaining that, but those were leads that we were actually creating from the health insurance leads, and we were selling them to laboratories that would do the test, and the laboratory would bill Medicare, and the tests were covered by the health insurance of the clients of 65 and older, of people taking 10, 15 prescription drugs a month. And we were helping a lot of seniors with those tests. But the industry was very volatile. I don't know. The laboratories were just like really killing us. And I went into business with these guys that I'm not going to get into that story either, but we did very well. We were doing very well. We opened up an office in Boca. We were making a ton of money, and but we were getting burned by the labs. We had gotten burned already a couple of times by labs, and burned us for a couple $100,000. Even if we were making a lot of money, we were getting burned by these labs, and then we would have to put together another client and start again, and it was working good. And then we finally got to deal with a laboratory where we actually kind of became like partners with this lab. And then my partners, did me wrong, and I ended up, not being part of that anymore. It's like it got taken away from me, and I don't want to get into that. But just be careful who you go into business with, people. And from what I understand, when they did what they did to me, the business went out of business within months after me not being part of the deal. So, but then I went back into business with Bud, and all this time I've worked with Bud in multiple ventures. We talk about it in our podcast, but I'm trying to move along here because I know I've been at this for about an hour and 40 minutes already, and I want to finish up. Bud is also doing genetic testing leads now. Okay. He's also involved with another guy, with another company, doing something else, doing the genetic testing leads with them. He invites me to go work with them because he knows that I have the team that helps create the leads. So I started working with him, and I didn't miss a beat, man. I kept making my 5 figures a month when I started working with Bud, and it went really good. And then the lab burned Bud and burned his company, and they went out of business. And in the middle of that, I get introduced to another guy with this multi-billion-dollar laboratory that wants to do genetic testing leads, and we get contracts in place, and we do all kinds of things to protect ourselves. And that's when we started HAG, the Healthcare Advocacy Group, and we start working with that company, and we start building that company. We actually made a contract with this company. It was a 90-day contract, and halfway through the contract, they burn us, and we had hired employees. We had built a monster business. We were making we were building the company for them, for the laboratory, and then the laboratory was going to buy it from us within that year. But it was a 90-day test run that we were doing with them. And halfway through the test run, I don't know what happened with them. I don't know why they did this, because they had already paid us over $150,000, and they hadn't gotten anything for their money, but they stopped paying me in the middle of the contract. We were about to mail them their first 50 kits. They never got their kits. They never paid my invoices. I was supposed to take them to court through New York, but it was going to cost me too much money when they stopped. I had all my money out. I had all my vendors paid. We had to lay off everybody. There was, it was just a mess that happened there at the end. And it was terrible. And then we did a mistake that I will never do again. And I wish I would have started driving Uber sooner, and started doing drive share Uber and Lyft sooner, and we wouldn't have been in the situation that we're kind of in right now. We're getting out of it already because things are going better already. But we had all of our credit cards that were we didn't have any credit, any debt. All of our credit cards were paid. Both my wife and I had a lot of credit, and we started living off the credit while I was trying to put something together, instead of going out and getting back into the grind, which I didn't want to do it anymore, because since I've been working from home so long already, making 5 figures a month or more for years already, and things were going wonderful, I just thought I could just put something together from the house, from the network and the people that we knew, and we let too much time go by. I let too much time go by living off the credit cards, and we ended up maxing out all of our credit cards again and putting ourselves back into that horrible situation that we had gotten into before, when we were about to lose our house. And then finally I started driving Uber and Lyft, which if I would have done from the beginning, right after that happened to me with HAG, we wouldn't have been in this situation with our credit cards. We're getting a grip on it again, guys. But here we are. I'm driving Uber. I'm building up my new business. I have a couple other things going on with my friends, with a couple of my really good friends that I've spoken about on this podcast. And it's just been an amazing ride. It's been a blessing. The Lord has many blessings for me and my family. I'm enjoying my life very much. I'm enjoying my daughter. She's 12 years old now. She's a little superstar. She's a football player. She's a flag football player. She's a point guard at her school on the basketball team. She plays all kinds of positions. She's a fantastic little girl. And my wife is amazing. I have the most amazing wife. I have Nelson, my mom, my family. It's been an amazing ride. All my good friends, Richard, Tito, Marcel, Bud Nemeth. If I didn't mention you, I have so many good friends that I am blessed. The Nemeth family. I love you guys. You guys help me so much in my life. I love you guys, man. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to me. I know that I've talked forever on this podcast. I wanted to get it all. I wanted to get in as much as I can. I could keep talking. There's so much that I didn't talk about, but one day we'll share it on here again. I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys have a great life. God bless all of you. Let's keep rocking. Let's keep building. I'm going to keep sharing my journeys here with you guys, and whatever else I can share. I'm going to bring on more guests on here, more young entrepreneurs to pump up and motivate the young entrepreneurs, and I'm going to keep rocking with this. I love it. I'm growing. I'm enjoying it very much. Happy whole week to you guys. I hope you guys have an amazing week. God bless all of you. I love all of you, and we'll see you on here again, guys. Bye-bye.